This time we're talking about skiing across large ice caps, not for crazy four-figure distances this time, but more just going as fast as our legs can carry us. Loyal souls of the channel will know that some time ago I rather daftly chose to ski this route across the Greenland ice sheet with a friend, twice back to back in fact, with no resupplies. It took us nearly 4 months. Not wishing for a repeat, a different friend and I turned our attention to this route, the standard route, if any route across this mammoth block of glacial ice can be called standard. Still well over 300 miles, it's normally a ski haul that takes a team a little under a month. However, some people have done so much faster. A few in around a fortnight in the 1990s, and then a trio of Norwegians skied the route in 2002 in a record 8 days and 9 hours. This stood for years. I've never been a speed skier, but was intrigued, so friend Wilki and I headed to the East Coast in April some years ago. I'm afraid not all the footage will be HD, so we'll be supplementing with low-res footage and some still images too. Red tape meant that April had recently become the earliest you could get an Icecap permit, and we chose the typical staging post of the town of Tasiilaq after a heli-hop via Kulusuk village. But there was a problem, or many problems. A broken helicopter, a strange cloud bank where we wanted to fly, and then flight crew stuck in the wrong place with not enough hours spare. Still, we got on with prep, buying a few extra supplies to top up these 9,000 calorie a day rations, which by the way is not what I'd eat now I'm older and, well, older, and getting our skis and sledges ready. We also headed out skiing in the low hills nearby, not because we were ill-disciplined, but because the helicopter situation was getting worse. Every day another cancellation and another excuse. Plus, with only one heli for the region, our private charter was bumped down the priority list.
Telemarking on slightly ridiculous findings, see how it goes. It's all hopefully a bit of fun.
It turns out that telemarking with backcountry cross-country skis isn't easy, but we took a local consultant with us.
How did you find that little training run?
Probably a bit too hard. I think that was probably a mile more than I can manage normally. So I think that's probably the end of the expedition for me.
Weapons looking good, strapped on, a bit lopsided.
It's a polar bear area, hence the protection, and then the consultant was educated in manners by a grown-up.
And after 4 days of just sitting here waiting, we can see blue sky for the first time properly. So we've got some potential for a flight today.
Conditions in town swung back to good spring temperatures, a solid snowpack, but we were running out of time. Wilki and I only set aside a couple of weeks between work commitments, and we were burning that up waiting and incurring expensive lodging costs. No one mislaid their baby. But, to be honest, of all the places to be stranded, this is not the worst. Being past the spring equinox, and actually not that far north, evenings didn't draw in that early. We had company too. Finn and Alex were planning to make a normal pace crossing as they were less time constrained, and a commercially guided team planned something similar. In fact, I guided that crossing the year before for the same company. Anyhow, evening japes and jollies, and one real upshot of our beautiful Arctic penitentiary was that Finn and Wilki began their years of a mountaineering-fueled friendship there and then. Back into the snowy hills to pass the time, and the weather meant that there were no flights anywhere, forward or back home, for days. Our consultant brought a colleague along and they posed for a while, before seemingly endless hours of doing what puppies do best. These are broadly defined as Greenlandic sled dogs, but this being the East Coast, were different in shape and build from the others on the west and the north. They mostly run on sea ice, and less in the hilly lowlands common in the west. Pups are left to run free for about 6 months before they start being trained into existing sledding teams with older dogs. We couldn't watch them break trail forever, and days turned into weeks. Wilki's and my trip was toast. We ran out of time, so I sought solace from one of the grown-ups. A gentle soul, this one. We had one final evening at the so-called Red House, a small hub for ski and climbing teams, and the next day in Tasiilaq was thankfully calm and clearing. We flew over to Kulusuk and waited for the propeller plane that would take us back to Iceland. In the meantime, there was endless helicopter traffic, rubbing it in somewhat, but I suppose that they were working hard to clear the backlog of sorties, and have brought in more flight crews from the west coast. In fact, this exact Bell 212 is the one that dropped me off on the long-haul journey some years prior. The weather closed in and we had that sinking feeling once again, but they didn't cancel the flight. Back to London, but only for a few months. In August, when the subarctic summer is ebbing and refreezes in some parts, especially up high, there's a second window of opportunity before the government paper shufflers make icecap crossings unlawful once again for the winter. So Wilki and I were back.
So this is what Kulusuk is like in the summer.
In summertime.
It's still quite windy, but and quite chilly, but it's a lot warmer than it was before.
Well, I'm looking for my sandwiches already. My ham sandwich.
The sea had still plenty of ice floating around, but these were the remnants, mostly being pulled down the east coast from the north, and some of the fjord sea ice still milling around in the protected waters. One benefit of summer is that it was rather cheaper to get from Kulusuk to Tasiilaq this time. Instead of the helicopter shuffle with lots of excess freight fees, we chartered a boat with a friend's cousin, Lars. Small fiberglass boats can deftly weave in and out around the blocks of sea ice. There's something mesmerising about sea ice, especially when you're offered a proper look at its structure and shape from the side and beneath the clear water. There's often a sea fog caused by an inversion layer. We emerged from the gloom and appeared on the rocky foreshore to unload the bags and gear. Weather in the Greenlandic summer is of course changeable, but you do get prolonged calm periods of high pressure like this. Perhaps you recognise this view from the same vantage point in the springtime, but no time to sunbathe. We needed to repack gear into expedition mode and prepare some special additions for the sledges. Narrow skis beneath would get bogged down and destroyed in the spring snow, but should help us on the summer ice cap. Apparently the helicopters have been running on schedule, but this time, for the time being at least, we had not used one as the sea was clear enough to get us to our access glacier. Still, time to find the best location in town for lunch. The key here was to identify the correct angle and flatness, the best view, and the height that will ensure wellness and posture and prepare us for a tricky week or so ahead. I'm not sure that the tabletop would last another day, so it was just as well that we found it in time, and as if to rub it in, proof once again that the flight shuttles between villages to science camps and so on were doing just fine. They cover everything from passenger flights to cargo to medicals to mail and post, and for private charters when not otherwise needed. Right, all packed up and ready to go. Our non-expedition stuff was packed to be freighted across to the west coast, and back aboard the good ship Lars for the multi-hour journey west to the generally accepted start point glacier for these crossings. This requires no small amount of courage. He had us as company on the way out, but would need to return alone, with offshore sections, amongst mobile ice and in unpredictable weather. The leading edge of the Nagtivit Glacier was just about visible, and Wilki showed where we'd like to aim for, but Lars's attention was attuned to our full 360 degrees. We had company of the enormous kind behind us. I think a minke whale. Tell me if I'm entirely wrong, or if you have no idea but wish to tell me that I'm entirely wrong anyhow.
Yeah, well it just expresses how blown away I am. That is
I'm trying to guess where he's going to come up next. There we are.
A bit more Wilki footage and we were near. The glacier is of the tidewater variety, which means the terminus is at or just over the sea, meaning it's fast moving and crevassed. Land terminus glaciers can also be turbulent, but usually only if on steep twisty ground. Anyhow, Lars was still rather more keen on identifying where dinner had got to.
Let's see if we can guess where he's going to come up next. There he is.
There wasn't a lot of sea ice in the bay, presumably the wind had pushed it out and south, so we had an easy approach to the edge of the freshwater ice. You pick a route using common sense. Flat and longer is of course better than steep, cracked and shorter. Team photo, and keep those fresh, healthy faces in mind when we look at the after photos at the end. Whilst you will find 0 polar bears on the ice sheet, and only very rarely a rather lost one on the west coast, here in the east there are plenty, so we accepted the weight penalty of a single barrel shotgun. They've been known to follow people up glaciers. Bears, not guns. Quick test, and done. Down at sea level there was 0 snow cover. This was bare, bumpy, disordered glacial ice, but we avoided crevassing for now. Even hauling super light sledges with only the essentials and 10 days of food, it was slow going. We hoped that once at around 1,000 meters elevation, the snow would have survived the summer and still be there, filling in the troughs and cracks. There was no evidence of snow just yet, and around 1,200 meters the bumps began to give way to small crevasses, which then grew in size. At least you can see where they are in the dry summertime. Even with our skis mounted both on our backs and atop sledges, we got stuck plenty, and the initial climb we hoped would take 8 hours was still incomplete after 12 hours of work that varied between moderately irritating and mild peril. I then managed to break through a fragile snow bridge over a crevasse intersection and stayed still with legs dangling in thin air over the abyss whilst Wilkie caught up and threw a rope. That wasn't fun, but we had many more crevasses to deal with. So, end of day one. And I'm going to do a very quick sum up of the day. Wilkie, what one word would you use to describe the last 14 hours skiing?
Epic.
I'll go along with that. I don't think you can really see very well now, but looking down towards the coast, we've just gone through about 15 miles of very heavily turbulent and crevassed coastal sea ice. Leading down to the sea ice. And yeah, it took a very long time, and I think we've damaged a number of bits of equipment which we now need to try and sort out. But this is the kind of terrain we're looking at. The temperature is kind of hovering around 0, but the sun's quite strong, so it's fairly comfortable. So I think what we're going to do is probably bivvy tonight and avoid having to take the tent up and down, which just takes up time and effort. But this is about the best surface that we've had all day. Bivvy we did. A surreal feeling of total exposure in this sort of terrain. But we only had 4 hours of sleep scheduled and were half a day behind our plan already, still below the snow line. And we ended up by trying to cut a corner in another maze of crevasses. Well, we're finally left behind the really horrible glacier, where we got stuck for 4 or 5 hours in a maze of massive crevasses and little islands of ice in between. And then we managed to find our way onto nice flat snow, and now we're making our way up the far more simple crevasse field going up onto the Icecap. These have got very strong bridges and they're quite easy to get over. But this is probably the last view we'll have of the sea, of the east coast, and looking forward to getting some more miles under our belt. We were now a full day behind our already wildly ambitious schedule. Our tactics were of long days and persistence. We'd never matched the trail-breaking ability of 3-person ski teams and the smugly efficient ski technique of Norwegians. But finally, with some snow, I spent a few moments mounting the children's cross-country skis to our sledges.
Alex testing out our runners underneath our sledges. He's put a couple of kids' skis mounted on a bracket underneath the sledge to make it run a lot easier. How is it, Alex? Fantastic.
Which at least got them off our backs. It's strange to be atop an ice sheet with bare hands and a sun hat. I'm a winter-spring expeditioner, so this is something of a one-off. Wilki and I had lots of miles to catch up. We stopped for half-hour naps and snacks at what we called lunchtime, and only put up the tent a handful of times for a few hours of rest. We needed to average over 40 miles per day. That's nearly 70 kilometres. We did make up time, but the first couple of days have put pay to a realistic chance of going sub 9 days. So we've just had to make a very difficult call that despite our best efforts and some pretty good pace skiing, because of the rubbish that we had on day 2, we're probably going to have to call it a day on the record attempt, and instead to try and ski as fast as we can towards the west coast and try and get a time which we'll both be proud of. Meanwhile, the calm weather of high pressure was over as we summited the vast domed ice sheet. So, summer expeditions aren't always that warm and still.
No, it's another windy day.
So there we've got our beautiful sledges on their skis, ready to go at 1,000,000 miles an hour again. And I think we're heading off in that direction. Or is it that direction? Yeah, that way. Cool, good to go?
Yeah, we were pretty efficient this morning. A lot more efficient.
Awesome. Right, I'll shut the camera down now because my hands are getting cold. We covered the bulk of the route at pace, but with our foot off the gas slightly, and we had to spread our rations out a bit. 15-hour days as opposed to 19-hour days. Once over the summit, pace can increase a little more now that gravity is on your side, but there's no slacking, as we knew that the west coast descent would be more technical than the east coast climb. After a day or so of claggy, overcast weather, and with our updated timeline, we did set aside a moment or two to stand, take a breath, and enjoy the place that we'd chosen to test ourselves upon. So as you can see, we've got a slightly different situation today. All of the fog and the snow and the bad visibility seems to have gone, and we've been left with this very flat, if slightly soft surface to ski on for our descent.
and we're not really sure what the weather's doing at the moment. Every second it seems to change. But this is the scene as we have it at the moment, with the sun out for the first time in a couple of days.
It's nice when ice caps offer a little calm. You can get away with the rarity of having an alfresco equipment reorganisation, some personal maintenance, without wind ruining the party. Dog Camp, by the way, is an old name given to a GPS coordinate that now ceased dog-sported ice cap crossings used as their furthest west the dogs could go, before needing to head back and let the professionally guided skiers finish the route alone.
So for our push down to Dog Camp, this is our lunchtime break during the day. Wilki's just doing some foot admin over there to sort out his slightly damp feet and blisters and whatever. We've started to see a few little cracks in the ice cap, which I'll just show you over here. You can see those lines just going off into the distance there. There have been a few of those, and so that's the first sign that the snow's getting very, very thin. We're getting down towards the snow line, and also that we're getting towards the coast proper, where the glacier will start. So we've got a few more hours today left, and then the real push starts tomorrow for the coast.
All this flatness was to savour. It would be a distant memory rather soon. And the 24-hour sunlight of the summer, now in August reverting back to night and day, had been hard at work on the surface. We dropped down below 1500 metres and came across our first monster. These melt rivers have always been a part of the annual cycle of the ice sheet, but have increased in scale and elevation over recent decades, and they are no gentle trickle. Here's a sense of their power. Luckily, this wide one could be waded with nothing more than slightly numbed feet, but others were more of a logistical hassle, even if narrower. They usually flow into a moulin, which is not somewhere you'd wish to end your days. You also get vast lakes, which can drain into the ice cap's depths in minutes should the ice movement open up a crevasse beneath it. We clear the worst of the rivers, and found a large bump of ice to hide behind for bivvying on night number 11. The icefall would be our challenge for the next and potentially final day.
So we're just at the end of our first 12-13 hour stretch on our final day. We've been working incredibly hard, done 22 miles by the time we got to Dog Camp, and now we've pushed another 4 or 5 miles towards the coast. We're just open air bivvying here. It's getting pretty cold now that the sun's gone down, but we don't have time for putting up the tent or anything like that, so we're just cooking something up and then getting 4 hours sleep before we can carry on skiing towards point 660. And so we've just got a bit of snow in the way there, so that the wind is broken and we can get a good night's sleep. Just before we finished skiing, we actually saw the mountains, which I think you can probably see just over there. But apart from that, that's about it, because we're about to eat.
This is my best attempt at beauty after over 300 miles of highly mixed ice cap terrain in a week and a bit, but could my visage get any worse? Well, I probably scowled a little the next day as we were thrown into seemingly endless miles of this. After 7 hours, making barely 2 or 3 miles and a few near accidents, we stopped to assess and think. Time for the tent up, but even that was tricky on the totally bare, rotten ice that had clearly been rained on.
So here is our final camp on the Russell Glacier. See our tent we've just put in over there. There's absolutely no snow cover at all, so we had to use ice screws to secure it to the ground. That's where we came from. And as you can see, 360 degrees, and all there are crevasses, and some of them are pretty big. A few minutes ago, just as we were finishing skiing, we had a couple of sledges go down them, which we had to then haul out, so size-wise they are pretty big, as I'll just show you. And they just go on forever. There could be 10 miles of these, which obviously writes off any chance of getting through today. Or
we had a time limit on this trip, as we did in the spring, a cushion for delays, but not another whole week or two, which this maze of chaos might take us to safely navigate.
This one's a bit of a monster. You can hear all the water dripping down into the depths. So there must be hundreds of these spreading all the way down to the bottom of the glacier. So we were having to use the little blocks of ice which were being jammed in the tops of the crevasses to hop from island to island, and some of them are a good 50, 100 foot deep, which you really don't want to fall down. I actually can't quite believe that we've actually come quite so far over such bad ground. You can see into the distance there, just endless, endless, endless tortured ice. And we've skied over probably over 50 miles of very, very bad ice after we left the Icecap itself, where it was nice and flat.
Basically, the crevasses are just huge, about every 20 metres or so. It's just getting really dodgy. So we've made the call to get an early pickup, an early helo pickup, which is a shame. I'm really, really gutted that we didn't get to the end point that we had originally planned, but we've pretty much done most of the route. So now we're just waiting for the helicopter. It's not how I thought it would finish, but there we go.
We deployed our happiest faces and made a decision. Instead of a pickup from the edge of the Icecap at point 660, we'd instead move it to here. Luckily, via our support team of family and friends back home, we managed to get onto a return leg. A helicopter was flying back to Kangerlussuaq, our destination. It was a minor detour and meant that we'd pay for just the return leg and not the there and back. It arrived around 3 hours later. I have a whole special sort of respect for a solo pilot who flies to an unknown area of ice, scopes out the area by eyeballing for a minute or so in fairly low contrast conditions, then has a go at landing, keeping the down thrust up, and if not happy with the angle, you can hop up again and try somewhere else. Impressive stuff. Wilki was actually qualified through the forces to bring in pilots onto tricky landing spots, and the ex-Swedish forces pilot would have known the NATO hand signals, but there was no way to communicate to him that he should trust us in such a role. Anyhow, he did a perfect job, and 30 seconds later, we and our gear were stowed. This is the exact route we'd have needed to cover to get ourselves to the true edge of the ice under human power. It flowed from one horror to the next. Big chessboard crevassing, large rivers, small rivers, deep gorges, crevasses so devoid of snow that we simply could not see any crossing points. We'd have had to have made endless detours left and right, and almost blind without any of the perspective you get from up here. Only some areas would have been easy, with mere bumps in the way. Still, rather beautiful. Dry land came into view after only a few minutes, which was just as well as we were paying by the minute. The ice then grew bad again. This could literally have taken us weeks without an eye in the sky to guide the best path. We had some good GPS routes from past years, but they'd not helped us much. Despite the disappointment that we'd had to miss out the final bit of ice in an expensive noisy red machine, we couldn't not chuckle.
No reason this can't be fun, you know.
We soon reached southern Greenland's only full-length runway, until recently the only passenger hub for the island. It was originally a US airbase and was critical as a stepping stone for US and Canadian crews getting to and from Europe during the war. There's no historic Inuit settlement here, and it's a stark, functional-looking place, although it does look rather nicer in the wintertime. The helicopter must follow the same flight approach that an aircraft does, and so we slowly came down the runway and then into a taxi lane and to the helipad. Down. And trip done. It was like our brains had intentionally decided not to inform us of the physical toll taken until they knew that we were safe and could decompress. Within an hour, I could barely walk. Wilki said the mixture of intensity and unrelenting grind put it up there with the hardest forced marches he had done while serving, and he had done the very hardest. Fair warning for those with fragile constitutions, everything hurt. Feet, ulcers from lack of sleep, cuts more painful than paper cuts. Usually I pride myself in coming back from tough trips without banal injuries or blisters and so on, but this trip was something else. Still, chuffed we did it. Turns out I didn't really like speed record expeditions anyway. Hope you found it mildly interesting. Bye.